Chetana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aidan. Absolute pleasure to be invited and be a guest here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to get started. I know that we have a mutual friend, David Hong, who you were just explaining to me how you originally met, and so I'm very glad to get to meet you, and very excited about our conversation today. I know that you have an extensive leadership background. You've worked at companies like Yahoo and Scribd and Netflix, and today you're director of product design at Coursera. I have taken many a Coursera course in my own life, so very excited to dig in with you. But normally, what we do is we actually start with a question to kind of set the tone, which was in your career and being at all these different companies. Has there been a memorable manager or boss or leader that you remember favorably?
Sure, Aidan. An amazing opening question right there, especially for a career trajectory of more than 12 plus years. I can clearly look back at the time when at Yahoo, which is where I always say I grew up, everything that design school did not teach me, Yahoo taught me. And one of the people who were responsible in that teaching was clearly my manager. And it was a moment I recall in a one on one where maybe for the third or fifth quarter, I was again trying to understand what it takes to be promoted here. And I could see the helplessness for my manager in terms of not everything in that decision was in the manager's control. There was the calibration, there was a cross functional sort of number crunching, and I was still new to the whole corporate America totem pole. And at the end of that one on one, the one piece of advice my manager gave me is Chetna, just operate and work at the level of the next position. Be that, be that person you want to be. And all I need to do then is put the title on you and to be able to acknowledge you with that. But don't look for this permission that you're going to be promoted or someone's going to recognize you. You can ask for forgiveness later, but jump right in. Till today, that has been a guiding light for me and a boss or a manager who can see me for who I am, as opposed to pigeonhole me with the bureaucracy or the politics or what have you.
Yeah,
And
that Yeah, I was going to say that is amazing because I remember a 22-year-old version of myself too. And I asked the exact same question from my manager. I used to work at this company called Nortel Networks. I don't know if you
yes,
remember it,
yes,
but I got the exact same advice that you did. And so that's so amazing. It's been 20 years, but it's the first time that I hear someone else got that same advice too. So that's pretty awesome.
thank you.
And so that's interesting. So that's what you heard first. And so I gather like the what you learned from that was that you don't have to wait to get the next role in order to operate that way. And you can make some mistakes. And like you said, ask for forgiveness.
Absolutely. And I think that aspect is what allowed me to unleash and explore my career path in terms of I could continue being an individual contributor, continue to excel in my craftsmanship as a designer, or what was coming to me naturally was the sharing what I knew, was empowering other people with what I knew or connecting the dots. And when I heard this, it suddenly unblocked me. I suddenly could do what I wanted to do and be who I wanted to be. And then I was able to have my one on ones with my manager with more aspiration, with more creative ideas. And of course, my manager also had to then empower me and clear the roadblocks along the way. And that also is what led me into finally recognizing in one of those interview moments way down the road after Yahoo, all right, Chetna, this is your moment. This next role is going to require you to be 100% in a manager role. This is not one of those 60% hands on design and 40% management, which I was holding on to that for as long as I could because that decision making was like, let me just avoid it as long as I can. But having heard that piece of advice or that unleashing, it empowered me to take that risk and jump into what it would mean, what will my success look like if I'm not designing, if I'm not building things, how am I going to define what I'm doing?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, just the notion of being this player coach where you're still doing the hands-on work, but then you're doing a little bit of management. It sounds like you avoided jumping in. Is that because you thought that you would miss your craft, or was it you were just worried about the risk of jumping into management?
Great point, Eden. At that stage, it was certainly staying with what I knew best, which is to solve design problems and to make stuff, to use my design toolkit to solve those problems. That's what I knew. There is really no training, or wasn't at least then, in terms of stepping into design management. Most often, and I see it now as I work with a bunch of my mentees, you're thrown into a situation of, well, the company needs a manager because we've hired a bunch of designers, or you have to step up and step into the role of managing without even recognizing, am I the right person to do this? Now I look back and I say that I'd rather be on a team where I have no manager than have a bad one. And maybe somewhere down our conversation, we will get to that. So for me, it was this self awareness and this maybe even imposter syndrome. Will I be good at this? Because I hadn't necessarily had the most empowering and encouraging experiences with previous managers. I also happen to be someone who grew up in India in a very entrepreneurial family. And so every time I would talk to my dad on the weekend on the phone and share with him my experience with a particular manager, his response would be, well, if you were your own boss, you could hire them. That's how you could solve for it. So I'd become very mindful about, do I know myself well enough to then make an impact in other people's lives? Uh, but I also knew the itch was there, the bug was there. I always found myself wanting to be heard and understood because I would see a conversation happening and I had a point of view. And I felt my point of view was not being understood because I didn't have a certain authority or certain title. So I started listening to that voice and I started finding a balance between, I could be solving problems by using interaction design, visual design, product design. Now I started finding this area where I started solving problem by talking to the people that were working on those problems. And that gave me a total high.
Yeah, no,
So
that's amazing how you bridged the gap in that way. And so, I guess so. Was it after Yahoo? Was it at Scribd the first time that you were leading a design team?
yes, going back memory lane. So, the other thing to share with you, Aiden, that has been a big influence in my leadership is my nights and weekends have gone in teaching design to middle school and high school inner city youth with a nonprofit organization that I've been part of for 10 years now called Interact Project. And this aspect of my life, where nights and weekends would go in teaching design, fundamentals of design. The goal there was to give these kids the possibility of design as a career. After Yahoo, I did give myself some time to further my passion for design education at a startup accelerator. It doesn't exist today. As startups go, it's an experiment. It may succeed, it may not. It was an amazing business model. And through that accelerator program, I really got to hone in on my skill to teach design and really do that mentoring piece, which is what brought me into my first role at Betfair and then at Liftopia, startups that today are not that well known. I did start in a principal designer role for the mobile team at Betfair, and the sort of OKR given to me was to build the mobile design team in the US. So Bedford is a UK based company. And I told myself, wow, I've never hired. I knew how I could do the hands on job, which was the the mobile design experience. So at Betfair, I started with taking on this challenge of building a team. And that is what brought me into just the joy of conversations like you're having with me and assessing who do I need to bring to then deliver the promise of the mobile app. Uh, After that, there was no looking behind. Liftopia was the next one, and then Scribd, and then moving forward.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And so, one of the things that you said earlier in passing was that you'd rather be on a team with no manager than a bad manager. So let's dig into that. Like, what are some things that, say, a bad manager would do that you, for example, wanted to avoid when you start to lead a team?
Absolutely. Gives me goosebumps to think about what all I may have been through, and am I doing that now to my team, and just having that point of reflection. I think this is also so true for parenting or parenthood. We always assume the way our parents treated us, we don't want to do that to our kids. But the thing I have learned in terms of mistakes even I made early on, one is to recognize that my role is about not only caring and looking out for my team, which is my direct reports, but it's equally important, if not more important, for me to know how to manage and lead upward. My boss, my cross functional partners, the stakeholders, the executives, that took me a while. That really took me a while in terms of prioritizing their needs, prioritizing their expectations from me, and then being able to be that glue between my direct report team and then the team that I was reporting into. Um, and the reason I realized that as a mistake is because my initial nature as a leader was of such care and concern and protection that it wasn't necessarily something that was empowering my team or even giving me the latitude to make certain tough decisions. It is at Netflix that I learned this notion of, is your team a family or is your team a sports team? That helps define the culture in which you show up as a leader. So that's one, in terms of those managers or bosses who over index in the team being very protective about them or caring to a degree where you cannot really have a tough conversation with them. I think a lot of this also had to just do with my cultural upbringing. I just uh, loyalty and care and concern with every employee of your team is the way things happen in India, at least then. The other thing in retrospect is I always assumed I know who I am and I know how I want to show up. My leadership is coming from a place of integrity and the reality of who I am matters most. I was very wrong. When you're in a leadership role, how you speak, how you walk, how you keep your calendar busy or full, available or not, really spoke to the perception in which I showed up to my team and to my peers and my stakeholders. And I didn't realize that. And when I learned about that through actually my director of HR in a one-on-one meeting, it was amazing to me. It was an eye-opening moment that, oh my God, I walk so fast. This is what she called out to me. Chetna, you're so hurried when you're walking from one meeting room to the other meeting room that the team has the perception that you have no time for them, even though I know you're the kind of person who will drop everything to meet with anybody who needs to talk to you. Because I know that about you. But the reality of who you are and the perception of who you are is magnified when you're in a leadership role.
Oh, that's such an interesting story, which is, I get it, which is you automatically assume, well, people know me, they know that they can come talk to me about anything, but these other things, people create these other perceptions about it. That's super interesting. And you kind of mentioned your calendar as well, and like how busy your calendar is. And so do you proactively, I suppose, make time?
I wish I could say that I have taken that lesson, that learning, and done something about it. So much of this has to do with the corporate culture we're working in. I don't want to make this a blame game, but honestly, Aiden, the definition of being a leader and manager in Silicon Valley tech companies seems to be tied to how packed Chetana's calendar is. And I'm working actively even now in this notion of maker mode and manager mode. One of my most favorite articles from 1999 by Paul, I think his last name is Graham,
Yeah, Paul Graham.
right? Talks about maker mode, manager mode. I have not succeeded in that. My calendar still looks scary, but I'm proud to say that my designers and the individual contributors in my team, we are striving in partnership with me to make sure they have quality maker mode time to make stuff and not always be in meetings. Also, because meetings could be meetings where you're making stuff, but somehow all the meetings we are in is about talking, sometimes on top of each other, sometimes without an agenda. So, no, I haven't been able to solve for that. And I do now seek out to be at companies, to be at places where there is emphasis and value in how we meet and how we spend our time meetings. And that I'm not measured by the busyness of my calendar. I should be measured by having more chunks of open free time.
One of the questions that I did want to talk to you about was the power of influence, because one of the things that we tend to talk about is, like you said, the way that you measure your success as a leader starts to change, right? When you're a designer, it starts with you're building things and you can see the things that you're building or the problems that you're solving. And now you go into from maker mode to manager mode, and maybe now it's a little bit more about influence. So I guess one of the questions around this is, what are your thoughts on the influence that, say, a manager should have? And like, as a manager, how do you know that you're successful? Or like, how can we define the success of managers in general?
Love that question, Aiden. Today, more than anything, especially for the design discipline, the significance of being influential has become more than I would have ever imagined when I was in design school myself. I often think about it this way. Um, you are aware of this. My roots, my early education was in biology, science student, moved into what was my side hustle, passion with arts. When I look back, I could have been an artist, painting a huge canvas and sell it for millions of dollars. Doesn't need a growth plan, doesn't need metrics. The thing about being a designer is you're solving problems that are measurable, that have a success metric, that truly make the world a better place, and it has a rationale to it. So now, when I'm in a design management or leadership role, the one thing I realize about influence is you could be an awesome designer with your craftsmanship. You could be an awesome engineer with your knowledge about the code and the domain and the business. But both of those are short lived if you cannot pitch or sell or communicate the work that you're doing. And that is where influence comes in. Influence is where you're able to move your agenda and have people believe in it, have people see you for who you are and be heard and be understood. And in my role as a design leader, the way I have been working with my teams is in order to influence, you need to have a point of view. You need to be able to show evidence for what you believe in. And it's not just an opinion. So I do think influence is different when you have an opinion, which may be rooted in culture, it may be rooted in religion. There are biases that also come into that kind of influence. I'm really talking about influence that is rooted in data, that is backed by qualitative insights, that has quantitative measurements to it. And then you're able to go in to an executive meeting or a pitch that you're making for a startup and share your point of view. So that's how I think about the value of influence. Um, and why today it's become so ubiquitous, because you don't really need to go to design school to be a rock star designer at any of the high performing companies in the valley today. It starts with your ability to position yourself, promote yourself, and create that influence around what you bring to that particular candidacy.
Yeah, so that's interesting. It sounds like, there's obviously like the design aspects, but you also have to be a great storyteller. And in order to be a storyteller, you have to start with having a point of view.
Yes.
Um, so I think, and so how did you, I mean, is that something that you developed over the course of time, or how did you learn how to get better at that?
Sure. I have found the design thinking and the design process, whether visible or invisible, to be super helpful in most of my career trajectory and pathways. The thing about developing a design point of view, I think, starts with first knowing what my core values are as a person, as a leader. In my case, I actually put myself through um, coaching or working with someone who could help me really crystallize my values. I've done a bunch of workshops to just have that courage and clarity. Well, this is what matters to me, and it's too bad if I'm in a leadership cohort or at a company where this doesn't matter, where it doesn't matter to them. So to be okay with what matters to me was the first thing. The second is what I just touched upon, researching, being curious, understanding where what I believe in stands vis-a-vis someone else's belief. Am I feeling weakened by that, or am I feeling empowered by that, even though I may be the only one in the room who believes in that? So that's the second place, just having an assessment of where I stand vis-a-vis someone else. And then the third is communication. Am I good at writing? Am I good at speaking? Or am I good at leading and facilitating, which is my medium for communicating that point of view or my values in order to exercise my influence? So these are the three sort of elements that come to mind in terms of areas where I have worked on. Um, I haven't yet published this page on my website, but I do have my core values written up. I do refer to them oftentimes when I have to make a decision. I'm very data informed and curious, which is probably also why there was a time in my life when the only thing I wanted to do was to be a doctor. And in terms of the communication piece, Aiden, honestly, it's an area I'm continuing to work on in terms of trying to be succinct, trying to be crisp in my writing, and then also in my conversations.
So that's really interesting. I've never heard someone say that, knowing your core values is an important part of being a great storyteller. Why do you think that's important? Companies have values, and people notionally, maybe they know that they have some values, but why are the values important in making you a great storyteller?
Love that question. And I'm so impressed by your power of listening and connecting the dots with me today. So thank you for that. So storytelling is about engaging and is about grasping someone's attention um, in a way that is new for them. Been there, done that, stories are there. But I mean, if you go down the whole, structure of a well-written movie script or an engaging story, I think the thing that grasps somebody with a strong narrative is who's the character, what happened to the character, the climax, the anticlimax. So if I peel the layers back, if I don't have a point of view that is unique, what's going to be my story? And if I don't have a point of view that is rooted in who I am, which is where my values come in, I'm just saying what someone else wants to hear from me. I'm not saying what my story is or what my truth is. And as I'm sharing this with you, I'm probably getting goosebumps myself, because the first 9 or 10 years of my life in the US, I would struggle with even coming to terms with who I am and how different I am from everyone else around me. Even just the fact that I am that woman of color that they're talking about in an executive room because DNI has become an OKR. Sorry for the acronyms, diversity and inclusion has become a key objective and key result for the company. So it took me a while to realize I don't have any story to tell because I'm not rooting in the core of who I am because I was afraid. I was afraid with what I'm going to say is going to be so different from this other person who thinks differently than me, who even speaks English different than me, because I grew up with the Queen's English in India. We speak American English here.
Yeah,
So I
no,
think
and yeah, I was going to say thank you for sharing that, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Like to understand that, for a story to be engaging, it also has to be unique, and for something to be unique, it has to be uniquely you, and that's tied back to your values and your upbringing and everything else, and that's a very very interesting way to put it, and thank you for sharing that. I thought that was awesome.
sure.
So one of the things that we also want to talk about, as a design leader, one of the things that you're constantly doing is, you're inventing the future. And innovation is a thing that a lot of people talk about, but it's a thing that you are doing on a daily basis. So what are some of your thoughts on, managers who are maybe looking to like make their teams or their organization be more innovative and like foster more creativity and ideas? What are some things that you think that they could do, or things that you've learned that actually work, that you would recommend?
Sure. A word that has always been around the block with product development, product design, um, and probably even overrated or underestimated to have an innovation culture or a culture of innovation. So the way I think about, I normally, and you may have noticed this with me with most of your questions, I look at the meaning of that word and really get to the core of what does it mean to be innovative. And I know in the design industry, this is thrown around a lot. I'm an innovative design leader. I find it very humbling before I can even say that for myself. And I catch myself working with design teams where we're being innovative, but we haven't even solved the problem in terms of its pure functionality. So I'm going to peel the layers back and say to you that innovation is something that's improving or replacing what has not been working well. So you first need to start with at least understanding what is the problem. One might say the iPhone and the introduction of the iPhone is one of the most innovative product launches out there. And it's true because they not only solved the basic functionality of a phone, which is to dial a number, be able to have a voice conversation, connect human beings miles and oceans apart, but they took it to the next level, which is the innovative aspect. But innovation cannot happen at the cost of making the basic task, which is the intuitive use of a phone, not usable. So I always empower and encourage my teams to first make sure we've really understood the problem we are solving. And that is again where curiosity comes in, the data comes in. Once we have understood the functionality that is a must have, now can we go that extra mile? Now can we add that 20%? So Google has the 20% time in the week where you spend on research and development and be innovative. There are many other companies and cultures that foster this space for innovation. Um, but I look at it as really understand the problem to be solved and then apply the tactics in order to take it to the next level. Just don't do it at the compromise of the basic functionality.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, which is like no matter what the problem is, innovation is, replacing something with a new way of working. But even in order to do that, you just have to understand it first and understand what the table stakes are and like the things that you have to solve. So, do you also apply this to the way that your teams operate. So beyond the actual problems, but say, one of the things I know you have some opinions on is just cross-functional teams, onboarding cross-functional teams. Like, have you used this framework to get teams to work better together?
That is a very timely question, Aiden, because very recently and at Coursera, one of the things we identified as part of our growing pains is we are hiring left, right, and center. And with this growth is this quintessential problem of onboarding our new employees, especially in a remote setting. How do we onboard them? How do we create this shared understanding of who we've been, where we want to go? And it's one of the key initiatives that fell on my lap in terms of driving what could the onboarding experience be for our new employees in a way that is sustainable and scalable. And so, to your point to our conversation about innovation, I am really thrilled and excited to share a little bit about a project that I have worked on with an external vendor, a dear friend of mine. She runs a setup called Improv Effect. And we together, along with cross-functional members on my team, have designed an onboarding experience that is rooted in the customer experience of Coursera. So to the point of innovation, we first have solved for the basic requirements of onboarding, which is, the hardware, the software, the meetings you should be part of, the Slack communities you should be part of, like the whole tactical checklist. But the innovative moment for me in this project collaboration was, how can we take this must have requirement and make it a more delightful, memorable experience for these new hires? And in order to do that, that was sort of the problem statement we came up with. We designed the entire internal onboarding experience mapped across the Coursera's customer journey experience. So it's right now in pilot, we are testing it, and it allows for our new employees to go through the experience our customers go through and feel that pain. What could be more of a sort of innovative doubling down in how we solve for this problem? And to your point about internal onboarding, this is how I think about it. We spend so much of our time and energy in understanding our product customers that we forget we are working together 40 hours of the week. We spend more time with each other than we do with our families most of the time. Do we know each other in terms of our internal dependencies and what each function does? So whenever I join a team as a design leader, I do spend some time initially to do internal onboarding workshops or conversations around, let's go meet with the sales team and share with them what product design does. Let's have the product designer team sit on a bunch of customer calls so that we can see what pain our customer support team goes through. So it's that internal sharing of knowledge and building a respect for what each function can bring to the delivery of the experiences we want for our external customers. That's how I think about sort of the value and significance of onboarding internally, because we take it for granted that when we're hiring people, everybody knows what the other function is doing. It's really difficult, especially in a digital tech, where whatever you learn is outdated like the next day. So I find it really helpful and internally fulfilling to create that empathy within the teams internally.
Yeah, I think that that's very well put, right? Like, especially as designers, there's this concept of you're building empathy with your customers, and I really like that you're basically saying as different departments, it makes sense to build empathy with each other, because at the end of the day, yes, you're solving things for your customers, but you're also solving problems for the other teams that you interact with, and so it's almost like, how could you not build empathy with them if you truly want to, deliver impact to everyone around you?
Wonderfully summarized. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So, Chetana, this has been super, super valuable. So many great insights, and I think we dug deep on a bunch of those, and had even some realizations on this in this conversation. So, but one of the questions that we like to end with, and something that we ask all of our guests, is for all the managers and leaders out there constantly looking to get better at their craft of leading teams. I know you had mentioned that you have a bunch of resources and that we're going to include in the show notes. But any parting words of advice or words of wisdom that you would want to leave for everyone out there?
Sure. Nuggets from these years of experience, mistakes. I think the one thing I would share for budding managers and even managers who have been seasoned over the years, in all humbleness, is really make the time to manage yourself well so that you can lead better. I don't think of my job as managing other people. Sometimes I even wonder, who am I to manage anyone? I'm there to lead you, I'm there to guide you, but I do owe it to everybody who I interact with to manage myself better, to have a sense of self awareness that I bring to the table, that I bring to my work.
That's great advice and a great place to end it. Chetana, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Aidan and Supermanagers, for this conversation and for bringing ways in which to give back to the community.